Orange pill, orange pill, orange pill.
Yo, 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 I can do this with my head. Look at that.
That's a pretty cool dance, Max.
Woo!
Right. So, Orange Pill podcast Telegram groups are kicking butt. We have something like 3,500 people in our English language one. The Spanish language one is up to something like 200 and something. It's booming. Of course, there's a lot of chatter going on in the Spanish language one. I don't know if you've been over there, Max, and checked it out.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's chatter. The Spanish-speaking world loves Max and Stacy. They love the orange pill. They've been following us for years. Many of them bought Bitcoin when it was $1, $10, $100. And they were just, smiling. They're smiling. And it's all working out beautifully.
Right. And I want to say my margarita today, I got this, some sort of posh tequila. I wasn't sure that there was any difference between tequilas, but it does taste different and it tastes better. It's called Avion. Remember I told you salida or llegada? You see, I'm practicing a lot of Spanish in our Spanish language group. And I also want to say, before we get on to our headlines, I found these from my storage from London that was delivered recently. And these are really cool stickers. I'll put a close-up on the screen of me shouting USA. I was like, yeah.
This was great. Yeah, saw these stickers all over London, all over town with the other stickers, Max and Stacy stickers, wherever we get the graffiti, different things, wherever around the world. There's this movement for orange pill. Max and Stacy grows and taking over. It's all fabulous.
Right. So what I was going to say about this, like what I want to do with these is I only have 7. I'm going to keep 2 for us, 1 for me, 1 for Max. And the other 5 I want to auction off and as kind of like a charity or donations to the home of the honey badger, Satoshi Center in Botswana with Ala Kanani, Bitcoin lady. She's occasionally, you'll find her in in our Telegram chat group. And so maybe I was thinking of a way that you can send a donation of like maybe $5 or $10. But one thing I want to say is if you give a donation and then send me like some proof of it or whatever, then I'll put your name in a hat and we'll auction off these collector's items because there's only 7 of them. And I'm going to sign it and say, 1 of 7, 2 of 7, 3 of 7.
Excellent idea. People love that kind of stuff. They love the stickers, and of course, the Satoshi Center in Botswana is home of the honey badger, the spiritual home of Bitcoin. Ala Kanani is a fantastic woman and really the standard bearer for Bitcoin globally.
I also want to say, here's big news here this week in America from Square, which is the Cash App where a lot of people in America buy their Bitcoin. I use it as well. You dollar cost average on swapandbitcoin.com/max. But I do my bulk purchases. Like when there's a dip, I buy on Cash App. And well, Max was right. Today, Square announced that it has purchased $50 million in Bitcoin. Square believes cryptocurrency is an instrument of economic empowerment and provides a way to participate in a global monetary system which aligns with the company's purpose. That is from their investors' relations.
Right. After Michael Saylor over there at MicroStrategy put $425 million of the company's cash into Bitcoin and wrote about it extensively and thoroughly and made an incredible case for why any corporation who wanted to avoid the melting ice cube of having too much cash on their balance sheet as it loses value in an inflationary world naturally other CEOs would have to look at this and would have to consider this. And so Jack Dorsey over there at Square, I did a tweet just 5 days ago and saying that he doesn't really, we can't really consider him to be all in on Bitcoin unless he commits part of the balance sheet to Bitcoin. And that's exactly what he's done now. So I'd have to say that Jack is now fully on board.
Right. And he's on board the orange pill blimp, heading around the world into coolness. Of course, that he bought $50 million for Square. That is 4,709 Bitcoin they bought. And at a price of about 10,600, a little bit over that average cost. So, he's in there with all of us in Orange Pill Podcast group. We're dollar cost averaging. Some of us down at, the under $10, into the $100, into the $1,000, and even at the $10,000. So we're all in the same boat. We're all Bitcoiners.
Right. I mean, it's becoming so obvious now that all these altcoins are really not going to make it. The hard forks like Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin Satoshi Vision, they're losing every day in terms of hash power to Bitcoin. And all the use cases of the so-called competitors of Bitcoin, none of them have materialized. And now the market's running away with Bitcoin. So these corporations, if they focus on Bitcoin. It's the most secure. It's got the highest hash rate. It's got what they need. Nothing else comes close to this. And you're not going to see any diversification. You're not going to see any move into anything else. It's just going to be Bitcoin all the way.
Right. And you know who was Bitcoin all the way from the very beginning? And that's Hal Finney. Plan B tweeted Hal Finney $100 trillion as everybody's looking at all of these big companies now starting to, move some of their treasury into Bitcoin. With the case of Square, Cash App, they've moved about 1%, somewhere between 1% and 3%, basically, I've seen, of how much of their treasury and their assets they've moved into Bitcoin. But Hal Finney, way back in, it was 2009, said, as an amusing thought experiment, imagine that Bitcoin is successful and becomes the dominant payment system in use throughout the world. Then the total value of the currency should be equal to the total value of all the wealth in the world. Current estimates of total worldwide household wealth that I have found range from $100 trillion to $300 trillion, with 20 million coins. That gives each coin a value of about 10 million. So the possibility of generating coins today with a few cents of compute time may be quite a good bet, with a payoff of something like 100 million to 1. Even if the odds of Bitcoin succeeding to this degree are slim, are they really 100 million to 1 against? Something to think about.
Right. Well, the further buttress that argument, what we've noticed over the past few years is that Bitcoin has an insatiable appetite for energy. So Hal Finney is saying that it would essentially be the equivalent to the global sum of all money would be 100 trillion. And therefore, this would be $10 million per coin. And the way to get there would be also to consider the fact that Bitcoin, it has this insatiable appetite for energy. The hash rate just hit a new all-time high. It's above 150 quintillion calculations per second. And that's never been in a bear market, really. Hash rate's always been going higher. And that's the most important number, much more than price. And so that energy requirement. So right now, Bitcoin uses just under 0.5% of all energy in the world to maintain the network. So I anticipate that number to go up dramatically. 20, 30, 40% of the global energy will be dedicated to Bitcoin. And of course, the transition from fossil fuel to renewable fuels will be happening at the same time, which is good for energy usage around the world. So yeah, I think that's a good target to get to. I think it makes sense.
Right. And, of course, the toxic Bitcoin community, including Max Kaiser, I believe, kind of shamed Jack into doing something because he only did something in the third quarter when all of you guys were harassing him, including Bitstein was there, Pierre Rochard, saying, what's up? Jack, why aren't you buying it for the treasury, a square treasury?
Right. I think, well, yeah, we did. This is going to happen in boardrooms in every corporation in America now. Shareholders and stakeholders are going to be badgering the CEO and the CFO and the board of these companies. Why are you keeping your cash in that melting ice cube of fiat money on your balance sheet? You need to get it into Bitcoin as the fastest horse in the race, as the hardest money ever known in humanity. And so it shows that the Bitcoin community is powerful. It's global, and it's almost by law the CFOs and CEOs of these companies are going to have to consider this now as part of their fiduciary responsibility. They have certain law guaranteed responsibilities on the board level and in terms of governance that must be fulfilled. And now part of that governance will include an examination of what's going on in the industry and what's going on in these cash positions. And so this is going to become a groundswell. We're going to see dozens and dozens of companies doing this.
Right. So it's Bitcoin on your balance sheet is the fastest horse on a melting ice sheet.
The fastest flying horse off the melting ice cube. You're trying to get off the melting ice cube. You get on the flying horse, that is Bitcoin, and you fly away like Pegasus into that 40x, 50x, 60x returns.
Of course, the other thing that this is all about is from the genesis of Bitcoin is the game theory. And these are the first movers. It was first MicroStrategy, then the Tahini's restaurant, and we interviewed them on Kai's report yesterday. And then now we have Square, and and of course, Paul Tudor Jones. So you're seeing them start to enter it, and then you're going to see a mad rush. We've already seen the individuals, this on an individual level. First, we had the coders and the geeks of the 2009, 2010 period. And then people like Max and Stacy started entering the space, in the 2010 to 2014, 15 period. All sorts of individuals starting to get involved. And then the madness hit in 2017. And, then there was chaos. And now the individuals are starting to sort themselves out. And we see all the shitcoiners being moved aside. And we see, a lot of great content that is just like the best that has ever been in the past 11 years of just explaining so many things, prepping everybody for this hyper Bitcoinization, because you've got to be ready for it, right? Because it's going to be mind-blowing change. It's going to be fundamental. It's going to be what they call in Russia shmuta, right? Where the institutions and the world as you know it, everything around you will collapse totally, and something new will have to rise from it. Obviously, when it happened in 1917 in Russia, and then when did communism fall? 1998. Or no, it was early, 1989. And, see, I can't even remember. It's all the tequila. But, in the late 1980s, early 1990s, we saw the collapse of the Soviet Union. And then they didn't have anything ready. It was just chaos, right? So we don't want that chaos. There will be chaos, but we don't want it in our community.
Right. The FOMO, fear of missing out, will click in at the corporate level, which is a higher level than what we've seen. And this is the path to the FOMO kicking in on the sovereign level. I saw last week that Kazakhstan is now got 7% of the global hash rate. They put almost $1 billion into Bitcoin mining. And we've already got Iran is at 3 or 4%. And we've got a couple of other countries now that are nibbling at global hash rate. And so at some point, what'll happen is one of the G7 or G20 countries will come in and say, hey, we want to get in on this. And they'll say, we're going to dedicate our energy to Bitcoin mining. And of course, the security goes up. Then the hash rate goes up, price goes up. Shitcoins continue to go to zero against Bitcoin. And the FOMO kicks in at that geopolitical central bank level. And the insatiable need for energy exponentially rises. That's the thing about the technology. It's backed by an insatiable appetite for energy. That's what backs it. People have said, and I would agree, that the Bitcoin protocol exhibits lifelike characteristics, and all life needs energy. And Bitcoin has the ability to gobble up all the energy there is on planet Earth. Essentially, you can't stop it from taking all the energy. That would mean no energy available for artificial intelligence and AI, essentially, which is good because we don't want that to take over. We want to just have the hardest money available, and Bitcoin is making that possible. It's the savior for humanity. Without Bitcoin gobbling up the world's energy, AI would take over, and we would be the slaves for AI-driven bots.
You know, the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. I first got confused with the Berlin Wall, and then that was the beginning of the end, right? You know, it never happens like that. But, you know, also like when Square and now bigger corporations are going to get involved in this, and say Facebook or Amazon start also moving some of their funds to the Bitcoin, their treasury into Bitcoin. One of the things I think that might be a positive is that those sort of people, those sort of corporations, spend an enormous amount on lobbying and buying our politicians. So we could get some more, you know, clarity and less hostility from Washington in terms of what's actually happening, especially with the IRS in the United States. You know, not only do they have that like for like tax, so you can't convert, like everywhere else in the world can convert to USDT, like Tether, in order to avoid converting to their local currency and thus incurring a tax. So they stay in crypto and they don't get taxed. But they also, in the United States, like any purchase at all, even if you spend $2 on a cup of coffee with, if you're stupid enough to buy coffee with your Bitcoin, well, you have to factor in how much profit you had made on that. If it's 50 cents, you have to declare it on your taxes. So I'm assuming the likes of Square and these sort of Silicon Valley guys will be able to, you know, start changing some laws.
Right. You know, people say, what if the government outlaws Bitcoin? Well, it's never going to happen because the biggest donors to government political campaigns will be people with a huge amount of Bitcoin. And people who want to win races are going to go to the richest people they possibly can, and those will be people with a lot of Bitcoin. And the quid pro quo will be, okay, I'll give you money to run for Senate or Congress or president, but we've got to change these laws to make them more pro-Bitcoin. And that's exactly what's going to happen. So the government will be transformed. That's part of the game theory of Bitcoin. It's baked into the cake. No government will be able to say to resist. We know that government is contingent upon a huge influx of cash. This is the way it works. So the richest people in the world will be Bitcoiners, and so they will make the laws to suit them.
Right. And here was a funny tweet. I don't know why, but I found it very amusing. So I copied it and I'm going to read it to you. This is from Matt Odell. He said, cash will be banned and they will force cuck money on you. I am not cool with that, but that's just me.
There's a lot to unpack there. So they're going to ban cash. Well, we know that they're going to go to digital money, which is surveillance money. Mm-hmm. And we know that the central banks are going to come out with their own digital coins. And the problem with this is that it just recreates fiat money, but in a more pernicious and surveillance type way. And this will just feed the frenzy into buying Bitcoin as a way to escape the surveillance state and escape the fiat money matrix, which increases security, increases hash rate, increases price, and which brings in more people, increases more FOMO. You get more corporations, more governments, and so this is the battle that's going on. And Bitcoin has something that nothing else has ever had, and nothing else in the future never needs to have. And that is absolute scarcity. This is the virginal birth of Bitcoin. This is the reason why no altcoin can compete. You can only do absolute scarcity once. Because once you've done it, then it's the pristine, perfect birth. And it is never, ever been experienced by us in this multiverse ever before. So absolute scarcity is the divine inspiration, if you will, the spark, the divine spark, the Promethean fire that transforms all. And that's why it's not even a mystery anymore. It's going to be anticlimactic, really, when You have basically the Bitcoin standard become the multiversal standard. That means it's going to happen.
Well, speaking of a multiverse and just awesomeness, we're going to have to skip to an ad from our sponsor, thesunexchange.com/orange pill. Orange pill.
Orange pill.
It isn't
orange
red.
Pill. It isn't red. It isn't blue. Orange pill is here for you.
Sun Exchange is the world's first peer-to-peer solar leasing platform. Earn Bitcoin solar power in communities in Africa and be part of the new world economy. Visit thesunexchange.com/orange pill and start monetizing sunshine today.
Right. Good commercial as always from thesunexchange.com/orange pill. And just a reminder that I have 7 of these limited edition amazing stickers with cool Stacy. Like, I was only like 35 in this photo, right? That this is from the very early days. I think it was like Karma Bank Radio or Truth About Markets days. And I forget the artist. Maybe he's in Orange Pill, but it was from a long time ago. And it's really cool sticker art. And, you know, give $5 or $10 to Alakanani. I'm going to put the address in all of the, details below the YouTube or on the Buzzsprout, podcast page. So you could donate, just let me know, and I'll put your name in a hat, and then we'll draw the hat on microdose. We'll try to do that, right?
Sounds like a good time.
Right? And that goes to Alakanani supporting the Satoshi Center in Botswana. And Botswana is home of honey badger. Should this COVID, 19 crisis ever end, Max and I do plan. I want it to end because I want to go to Botswana and I want to go on the search for the honey badger.
Honey badger safari. That sounds like a lot of fun. I'd love to do that. Get into like one of those Range Rovers and get a tranquilizer dart gun. Maybe take down a honey badger and then creep up on it, and look at it in person and that type of thing.
I thought you were saying you wanted to take some tranquilizers and then go to look for the honey badger.
No, my tranquilizer dart gun. Like Marlon Perkins in that show, Mutual of Omaha. Remember, he's always out there hunting animals and whatnot. He's got his tranquilizer dart gun, I believe. It's all fuzzy now because it happened 40 or 50 years ago.
Yeah, I'm not sure that a tranquilizer gun works on the honey badger. Remember, Alakanani did reveal to us the truth about the honey badger is they grab onto your ankle and they bite, and that's what they're taught in Botswana, that if you ever see a honey badger, do not taunt it.
Yeah, it's probably you shoot it with a tranquilizer dart, right? The honey badger probably reaches up, grabs it like a ninja, flips it, and then fires it back into your skull. And, before you know it, you're on the ground, unconscious, and the honey badger's gnawing at your foot.
Right. But, JP Morgan was in the news, and I just want to bring that up because we can't forget why Bitcoin, right? And in the Genesis block of Bitcoin, it of course said Chancellor on brink of second bailout from banks. So that was back in 2009. Max and I were covering this on first the Oracle for BBC and then Kai's report for RT. And they were in the news again. This was in the past week. JP Morgan to pay record $920 million fine for alleged manipulation of global markets for metals and treasuries. And I had responded, most people would be impressed with the size of the fine. Unfortunately, we won't be told what percentage of their ill-gotten gains they were being made to return. And Thorst Donk responded, is it just me or do we hear this same news every 6 months or so? So to me, like JP Morgan is the cat in the matrix, in the fiat matrix. It just always appears like it keeps on. We're on the same loop. It's like the same loop of fraud. In fact, I just saw a headline today and I haven't read it yet. So I'm just going to tell you what the headline said in paraphrase on Zero Hedge is that they're already manipulating precious metals markets again. And all the stuff we showed on Kai's report, we showed like we had people on to show you exactly when it was happening to the second. They could see the manipulation of precious metals happening. Who knows how many billions they stole. But, they're apparently doing it again. It's never going to stop. This is the fiat matrix where plunder is incentivized. The moral hazard allows for them to continue doing this. It's all a fake game anyway, because it's all fiat backed by nothing, right? But we're all like, other than their violence.
Well, yeah, I mean, there should be a deterrent if you're caught breaking the law. There should be some deterrent. Otherwise, why have the law? Like I was saying before. So we calculated that Jamie Dimon and JP Morgan got to keep 75% of all the money they stole. They had to return 25% as a token to gesture to appease the hordes of people, and for them not to burn down JP Morgan or chase Jamie Dimon around with a pitchfork, etc. So then I say, okay, if that's the standard of justice, then we have to apply it universally. So when it was discovered recently that there was a robbery of $1 million, somebody was caught robbing $1 million. So the standard of justice here would be they get to keep $750,000 and return $250,000, right? That's the standard of justice that Eric Holder back under Obama, he rewrote the judicial system for bankers, where he said, look, these systemically important banks are outside of all current framework of our legal system. And what he set up was this idea where people like Jamie Dimon and JP Morgan get to keep most of the money they steal, and they consider that in the national interest. So I don't think that's the way to. I think you've either got to apply that standard of justice to everybody in the community, or you've got to apply the standard of justice that they say that they're pursuing to the people, everybody, including, let's say, Jamie Dimon, who's like a recidivist, law-breaking guy who he keeps doing the same crime. So, I mean, we shouldn't be surprised if there's no penalty for the crime, or he's rewarded for the crime in this case. We would not have no expectation of him changing his behavior. He goes to Capitol Hill and they interview him, and he sticks his thumb up. He goes blah, 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 and he makes fun of people. He wears his presidential cufflinks, and he just is laughing at everybody and like, I get it. You're all crooks. And, that unfortunately, when I see looting on TV now, people are obsessed with this looting going on. There's looting going on in America. Well, there's looting going on at JP Morgan. So why isn't, if you're upset about the looters burning down those small businesses across America, then you would also be upset about Jamie Dimon crashing the American economy, right? I mean, so what is it? How come he gets a pass? I don't get it.
Well, it's called propaganda, and we're going to go into that after our interview with Adam Back. I'm going to talk to Madge Weinstein, and we actually do talk about this propaganda. But the propaganda is that they get the people of America, 40 million people. They say George Floyd deserved to die. He should have been shot dead, choked to death, squashed to death because he tried to pass $20 off. But they will never ever see Jamie Dimon but as anything but a massive hero, because he goes onto the Lenny Riesenthal sort of shows like MSNBC and CNBC and Bloomberg, and they hail him as a great hero. And look at that, like he gave $920 million to us. Like, what's, like, you deplorable people out there, that's like, you will never make that in your lifetime, and here he is giving us $920 million. So that sort of that propaganda works on the people. But we're going to
to continue on this George Floyd analogy. I mean, so George Floyd allegedly trying to pass a counterfeit $20 bill. Now, to work this through with Jamie Dimon, we know that more than 97% of all the money in circulation actually comes from the banks. It's not comes from the government. Every time a bank makes let's say a mortgage loan, they are printing money into the economy. They're not using reserves. It's not backed by reserves. They don't have any reserves because as a percentage of debt, all money is lent into existence by banks. So they say, okay, you owe us $1 billion in fine. He'll say, hits a button, tink, and goes, okay, there it is, boom. So he counterfeits $1 billion, and he gets to keep hundreds of millions of dollars. He's a billionaire now of what he stole. Now, there's George Floyd. He's allegedly passed a fake counterfeit $20 bill. If he were Jamie Dimon, they would have come over and they said, okay, here's your penalty. You're going to have to give us 25% of that $20, and you can keep the rest. And that's your penalty.
Yes.
And that's the equivalent, the justice system.
And we don't even know if that was a fake $20
We don't know.
given to him
Allegedly.
but even if it was fake and they found 100% certain it's fake, that it was not printed by JP Morgan and Jamie Dimon.
Jamie Dimon is guaranteed without any doubt counterfeiting money.
Yep. And
That's counterfeiting money.
And that's why we Bitcoin, because fuck banks, right?
Because fuck banks.
And with that, we're going to go to one of the biggest names in Bitcoin, one of the earliest names. He's so early that he's actually mentioned in the Bitcoin white paper from October 31st, 2008. Adam Back. All right, Max, guess who we have with us?
Wow, Adam Back. This is going to be cool.
Yeah, of course. If you've read the Bitcoin white paper, you know that he was mentioned, or Hashcash was mentioned in the Bitcoin white paper, and he's the co-founder and CEO of Blockstream. He's a cypherpunk and a cryptographer. Adam Back, welcome to Orange Pill.
Thank you for having me on.
Well, of course, the big news this week was Square buying $50 million worth of Bitcoin for their corporate treasury. Is the corporate FOMO going to begin now?
I expect this isn't the last one. And actually, there are a number of Bitcoin startups and exchanges that have been doing this for years as well, right? You have, various portions of their balance sheet and cash reserves in Bitcoin.
Right. And so this, begs the question about game theory, because we've been talking about game theory since we started looking at Bitcoin many years ago, and it seems to attract game theoretical outcomes. People start to fear of missing out, FOMO in, and we see it operating on the mining level, and now it looks like it's jumped to the corporate level. So is it correct to characterize this as potentially being fear of missing out or game theory jumping to the corporate level? There's approximately $4 trillion held in cash by corporations in America. And as Michael Saylor of MicroStrategy calls it, a melting ice cube that's guaranteed to lose purchasing power due to the ravages of inflation. So the question, Adam, is this game theory element of Bitcoin, is it now jumping to the corporate level?
I mean, I think there is an element of people looking at what's going on around and becoming fearful at a certain point, which could trigger the so-called hyper-Bitcoinization when there's a divergence in price. I think particularly the current environment during COVID is an amazing setup for that to become possible, because there's a lot of macro uncertainty, a lot of money printing. Somebody was just saying that 22% of US dollars in existence were printed this year. That's an amazing statistic. If not for the economy being in a kind of shock state and people selling things at reduced prices just to get any business, in normal times we'd have just ingested 22% inflation right there, right?
So let me ask you this.
Times.
For, Hashcash is part of the history of Bitcoin, the cypherpunk history of Bitcoin. You developed Hashcash, and did the idea of inflation pop into your mind during that development of Hashcash?
Not this kind of inflation. So the previous electronic cash systems, like the DigiCash system, were trying to work with banks. So they were, looking to make a digital dollar. So they would be like the Tether of today, right? But the problem with that and how DigiCash came to fail is that you're relying on a banking relationship. And so shortly after Hashcash was introduced, which was in March 1997, so by April, I think, of 1997, there was a discussion between Robert Hettinger and myself where we were talking about using Hashcash mining to make an electronic cash system. So that you could avoid needing a relationship with the bank. The challenge there was how to deal with price inflation, and so there was a missing bit of design to do with basically what became Bitcoin's difficulty adjustment. People hadn't quite figured that out.
You mentioned that in a tweet recently, the addition of the difficulty adjustment to essentially the Hashcash architecture is kind of the secret sauce that makes Bitcoin Bitcoin. Would you agree with that? And can you just walk us through what happens exactly?
Yeah, I think that's the case. So certainly in these early discussions, people were struggling with the concept of how to have sensible inflation rates, like supply inflation rates or price inflation rates in the system, in part because, some of them were thinking about it that they would somehow need to keep the price stable versus a dollar, or that if people could mine coins as fast as they wanted, they would mine lots of coins if they were valuable and buy new hardware. The hardware would get faster, people would build ASICs. And so they were concerned that the price would hyperinflate and there'd be a mass of coins. So Bitcoin introduces a couple of things. For example, the concept that coins mined for low amounts of hash rates in the early days are considered equal with coins mined later. That's a system design choice. If you're starting at the design phase, you might think, well, the value is related to the number of hashes that went into it, and then there would be less, there'd be less kind of difference in the input costs. So that difficulty adjustment was a brilliant move, and the previous systems tried to address inflation, like supply inflation, like that, B-money and BitGold. They relied on humans partly. B-money had some kind of supernode structure of servers that had to decide on how many coins would be mined for what cost. So there's a kind of policy decision there. And BitGold introduced like a collectible market. So Nick Szabo's idea was, well, people can mine stamps as fast as they want. And if they mined a lot this month, they're not very scarce. And then it would be a stamp collector's job to assemble a stamp book, with some scarce ones and some not very scarce ones, to assemble a standardized value. And then that would become the coin. So it's kind of a very manual process. So I think Satoshi managed to simplify all of that and automate it. So there was no human factor involved. And the trick, in hindsight, people look at Bitcoin and say, oh, I understand it, but it takes an enormous leap of intuition to get there because people tried, to make a system work. And the trick is really that you just fix the rate of supply within a 4-year period until the halving happens, and you let the market decide what happens to the price, whether the price inflates or deflates, but the supply inflation is at least a constant rate.
Right, and this kind of speaks to what I think was a vastly misunderstood aspect to the technology that led to a couple of the core developers leaving the project a few years ago, actually, because there was this idea of the mining death spiral, that somehow after a halving that happens every 4 years, that the miners would be disincentivized and it would be a negative cycle working in reverse and the project would die. But that didn't happen. And the difficulty adjustment proved to be the kind of able to suss out the sweet spot that was going to attract miners who would put capital to work to get coins, but not make it too hard or too soft. So those guys who were talking about this mining death spiral, they were dead wrong, correct?
Yeah, it's funny how that happens. So people keep predicting the imminent demise of Bitcoin, and it just destroys their reputations and savings if they switch into forks and things. And there seems to be the case for these halvings too. So the death spiral is some kind of conspiracy theory that if the hash rate falls because mining becomes less profitable, that might scare people because transactions are processed more slowly. And so then the price would fall and it would escalate and get worse. And of course, that doesn't seem to happen at all. In the previous to current, most recent halving, the hash rate went up. And people were giving a multitude of reasons why this would be the case. Some people are mining at a kind of profit share, right? So they keep making money regardless of the hash rate. Other people have, maybe free power, or they've already paid for their power. Some people leave, and people can hold without cost. And if there's a slowdown in transactions and people need to transact urgently, they increase their fees. And so these days, the fees are more significant, like 1 to 1.5 Bitcoins per block of a total of 6.25. So it's getting significant. So if there was a big slowdown it's entirely possible that, if things backed up, the fees could match the block reward, and that would clearly solve the problem as well. So yeah, it just really hasn't happened. And of course, the miners are doing economic planning, right? They know the halving is coming, and so if they've made an investment shortly before that, they've figured that they would be able to persist past that.
Yeah, the interestingly, you compare Bitcoin and its monetary policy, because that's kind of built into it, and you look at the central banks around the world who have a monetary policy, and that monetary policy by central banks is completely subjective to human interaction and human error, correct? And with Bitcoin, it's mathematically hard-coded into the protocol. We know exactly what's going to happen and the distribution of coins over what period of time. So by relying on this mathematical protocol has now scared the central bankers into questioning their own viability and their own methodology, because they're like, wait a minute, we're supposed to be gearing our monetary policy and the rate at which we print money based on our economic models and how we are managing society. And we're getting beat by this hard-coded mathematical monetary policy. And as a result, they're trying to introduce their own coins to compete with Bitcoin. Is that going to work?
I don't think so, because I believe the central bank coins are just digital dollars or euros or what have you. So they're still subject to these policy-driven quantitative easing. And I mean, if anything, things are trending in the wrong direction with modern monetary theory, which is just basically saying that they can go to QE infinity and then all bets are off. And if you get price inflation, well, you ramp the taxes up, and somehow this is going to work. So I think it's coming off the rails, basically.
Right. So earlier, you two were talking about, basically the forks that happened and the people that rage quit Bitcoin. And a lot of it is to do with this notion of what is Bitcoin, what is cash. It's supposed to compete with Visa. It's supposed to compete with, the financial markets and all this sort of stuff. But, you at Blockstream seem to be working on all of that, right? You're working on Bitcoin Core, but you're also working on Liquid and Lightning and Blockstream satellites. So you're covering the whole matrix of a new financial infrastructure. Where do you see the most promise? Where are you focusing most of your attention at this moment? And then go into what are these satellites about?
Yeah, so I think that because Bitcoin started with a single layer, some people naively thought that this is it. All the world's transactions are going to go on a broadcast chain, but anybody who knows anything about networks knows that that won't work. So most networks, like GSM, the internet, TCP/IP, radio network protocols, all have layers. And so Lightning is a way to get point-to-point routing, so that's just fundamentally more efficient and can net things out. So I think it's a more scalable protocol for retail and micropayments. But anything that improves Bitcoin in one dimension typically makes it worse or makes a trade-off in another dimension. And so that's the case with Lightning, right? So you've got some hot wallet risk, and you've got some reactive security trade-offs. You have to monitor, or you have to have a watchtower monitor, and that's the cost. So that's fine for retail and micropayments, where you might put $100 on a phone that costs more than $100, and if you lose it and you didn't back it up, you're probably more worried about having lost the phone than the Bitcoins on it. So that's fine. But conversely, you wouldn't use that technology, in my opinion, for trading. And the other problem is with putting everything on one chain. People complain about Bitcoin becoming expensive to transact, but actually, I think it's fairly widely understood that the transaction fee escalation is almost entirely driven by traders who are trying to move funds between exchanges and between wallets and exchanges and vice versa. And so that's what Liquid is about: is to provide an experience that gives a better benefit, gives a set of benefits to traders to entice them to use a Liquid chain instead of the main chain, which then leaves the main chain to do what Bitcoin main chain is best for, which is censorship resistant, unseizable, unfreezable money as a digital gold, and to support long-term storage. So I think with Liquid, you can trade faster, you can trade with more confidentiality because of confidential transactions, and you can trade other assets like US dollar, Tether, and Canadian dollar from Bitcoin, things like that. So you can do, atomic trades. You can do confidentiality. You can transfer faster, like a couple of minutes. But you wouldn't use that for cold storage. You wouldn't really want to use that for uncensorability if you're pushing the envelope. That's Bitcoin's main case. So again, it's made a trade-off compared to the main chain. But both of these things, they're making different trade-offs for different purposes. I would expect there will, midterm be one or two more layers specialized in different things. Maybe a privacy layer. People have been talking about state chains, which is a different kind of layer 2. So I think that's the way that things pan out in networks. People optimize different layers for different purposes.
And finally, about the satellites on that answer?
Yeah, so the Blockstream satellite is broadcasting Bitcoin transactions and blocks from 4 geostationary satellites. So it has almost complete global coverage. And we're selling now the hardware accelerated equipment to receive it, but you can also receive it with software-defined radio, which makes the equipment cheaper. And then you have to offload the computation to like a laptop or something. So now the point, there are many uses for it. One is to increase the global reach of Bitcoin. So if you look on a globe with Bitcoin full nodes pinpointed, there are whole continents with very few full nodes. And there's one in Nigeria, and we know the guy. It's a developer. So the reason is that bandwidth is expensive in some countries. Even they pay more for bandwidth than we do, and their salaries are lower. So there's a double hit. And so with a satellite, you can at no incremental cost, you can receive the Bitcoin network and participate more directly in the Bitcoin network. And the biggest cost with participating in the Bitcoin network is receiving the bulk data. If you want to transact, the transaction is actually quite small. So there's that component. It's also pretty useful for mining in remote locations. There's some trapped energy sites, so you can receive transactions and block proposals and interact with a mining pool using this kind of technology as well, which is something we've working with miners to do. It's also useful for general privacy, because if you are running a full node, you're advertising to the world. The taint tracing, chain analysis type of companies, potentially, bad actors on the network who are connecting full nodes and trying to spider the network and figure out which IP addresses are originating transactions. So by using the satellite, it's passive receive ending technology. So nobody knows you're using it. All you have is a satellite dish pointing at the sky, and it's actually pointing at, these are general use satellites with TV channels and other commercial applications on them. So you'd have a reason to be pointing at it. And finally, for exchanges, exchanges, payment processors, people with a need for high availability, it's useful to have redundant connectivity and to be sure that you are on the right chain. If somebody were to hack your router and block, delete blocks that are arriving and show you another weaker chain, you could accept the wrong chain, and that could be catastrophic for an exchange. So it's generally advisable for a business with high value at risk to have multiple redundant internet connections and not have it be too obvious what those are. So the satellite is a completely separate kind of internet connection. And so, if somebody wanted to do some kind of selective denial of service to convince you you'd accepted a transaction which wasn't correct, they'd have to jam the satellite as well, which is harder to do.
Right. And so when you say that Blockstream has a satellite, what does that mean? Do you guys rent space on a satellite?
Yeah, we rent space on 4 geostationary satellites. The most recent one was launched a bit over a year ago by SpaceX as they upgraded one of the satellites. And they are operated actually by different companies. So we tried to get some ownership diversity to provide redundancy from kind of, political interference, I guess. And so we rent fractional bandwidth.
I have a question, a follow-up on that, because you mentioned Nigeria, and I want to talk about, first of all, distribution of Bitcoin and the resources of Bitcoin. I think it's a pretty wide, fair distribution considering, people all over the world have Bitcoin, and many of them were watching our show Kaiser Report back in 2011 and 12 in Latin America. Our show gets dubbed into Spanish, and there's 1 million views an episode. So, a lot of people heard about it early. But in terms of who do you think has the advantage or disadvantage at the moment in terms of in Nigeria, they're disadvantaged in the US dollar run global banking system. And because of that, they've been cut off from the banking system. So we've seen that they had to circumvent it. They had to, by necessity, go to Bitcoin to do trade with, they do a lot of car imports from Japan, for example. So they have to use Bitcoin because they can't access dollars, essentially. So, I mean, who do you think is more advantage or disadvantage, ironically, in a way? Because if your economy is like a basket case and you have a currency like Lebanon or Argentina or Venezuela, in a way, like necessity makes you an early adopter. Like you were there before Jack Dorsey or MicroStrategy.
Yeah, I mean, it's a curious effect. People who are suffering from banking infrastructure or having their bank accounts frozen sometimes, get angry and go all in Bitcoin because they, screw the banks, they close my account. And of course, that works out very well for them if they did that some years ago. And similarly, people in countries with untrustable banks or poor corresponding banking relationships, the recent wave of banking regulations have actually exacerbated that, made it more difficult for smaller countries to maintain banking relationships.
Right. And when you hear about a country like Kazakhstan now putting, according to recent reports, they have 7% of global hash rate. Iran's got 2 or 3% of global hash rate. And so we see Bitcoin and this whole game theory playing out on the sovereign level. Based on what your research is over at Blockstream and what you know, are those numbers correct? And is that a big trend?
I'm not sure about the breakdown by country, but there are certainly people who have tried to collaborate with pools to figure that out by looking at the IP addresses that are bringing the shares into the pool. So there is some hard data that underlies some of those reports. So that's pretty interesting. I think it is redistributing a bit. It's becoming more global, there's more growth in North America, Canada, the US.
They say in the history of Bitcoin, of course, one of the mantras is that it's censorship resistant. And people assume that has to do with Julian Assange, who's a journalist, and he's being censored. And Bitcoin was a way for people to fund his work early on. But it also now applies to these countries that are being censored using the rails, such as the SWIFT system, and weaponizing the way payments are made around the world. So does that censorship resistance idea of Bitcoin now apply to these countries? And will these countries, is this the path for them away from US dollar hegemony?
I mean, it could be as a sort of necessity factor. And I mean, one thing that people have observed over time is that Bitcoin surprises to the upside. So when we started with Blockstream, there were no banks involved with Bitcoin, and within a couple of years, every bank you'd heard of has their own blockchain lab. So things move very quickly. So it would sound surprising at this point, but it may be that within a surprisingly short period of time, the strategic mining by governments or Bitcoin reserves, competing with gold reserves by countries. I mean, I guess the corporate world is moving a bit faster on that front, but we may see the countries too, or sovereign wealth funds.
Yeah, in terms of countries as well, I believe you're involved with the bank Avanti opening in Wyoming. Are you seeing because you are a global company and operate all over the place, are you seeing any country that is more favorable? Not only in terms of, say, Texas, where mining costs are so low, electricity costs are super low, but you have Wyoming, which is way ahead of the game in terms of offering, positive legislation around Bitcoin. Do you see that the U.S. is kind of right at the forefront right now? There are enough locations like in states or cities around the United States acting, in a proactive way?
I think the US is a bit of a complicated area for exchanges to operate in because you've got the per state financial regulations. So there's a kind of scale question where people have to apply in 52 states or start with some states where most other places have federal banking charters and things. I mean, I think, I live in Malta. Malta seems to be pretty favorable. And there are a number of companies with presence and incorporations here. Switzerland seems to be quite favorable. So it's popping up. A lot of the exchanges appear to have offshore incorporations, British Virgin Islands, Seychelles, Caymans, things like that. So
of course, nobody wants an American client on their exchange. It's very dangerous, as BitMEX found out, of course. And you grew up in the United Kingdom, and we were just mentioning Venezuela, Argentina, Lebanon, Iran. Their hyperinflation, currency problems, and wealth confiscation, and that's been a natural drive for them to go into Bitcoin. But, the United Kingdom as well, a lot of us Westerners, especially since all this, quantitative easing and Fed intervention and central bank intervention in markets has made us kind of docile in a way. But you were bailed out in the United Kingdom in 1976 by the IMF. Of course, in the Genesis block, it says Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks. So, I mean, do you think there's a bit of a naivete, like that everything is going to stay fine, like even with this global lockdown, like our currencies will be fine, nothing will happen to us, all of our bank deposits are insured and things like that?
Well, I mean, I think some market commentators have observed that COVID sort of uncovered some stored problems. It didn't entirely create them because the world hadn't really, unwound the quantitative easing from 2008, and there were some structural problems. But there's this curious and perverse effect. Right after the COVID news, the US dollar got stronger. There's like flight to safety thing. People fly to what they understand or what they know, even if it's ground zero for QE printing actually. And there's this 22% of dollars created in 2020, and yet we're not experiencing price inflation. Well, that's because the economy is in a downturn and people are trying to sell things at any price they can get. I don't know. I mean, it seems like for example, Japan has had these kind of very low inflation rates for a very long period of time. So we're assuming that eventually this stored up problem will come out. But I don't know. Like if the modern monetary theory stuff comes to play, I think all bets are off. And the guys, people who have assets to manage and balance sheets to preserve are not going to sit there and hold those things, right? They're going to invest in stocks, which is why the stock markets are up, which is crazy. I mean, a lot of those companies should be in dire straits given the industries they're in, but the prices are up because they're monetizing stocks. So there seems to be a lot of unsustainable things going on at the moment. So I think Bitcoin is an interesting hedge for anybody really at this point.
Right now, you were talking about the layers of Bitcoin, the second layer being Lightning, et cetera. You mentioned security and privacy. And so I want to ask you about this. So I just learned about this myself. Zimmerman's law. It states that the natural flow of technology tends to move in the direction of making surveillance easier, and the ability of computers to track us doubles every year, according to Zimmerman's law. So let's talk about the privacy issues of Bitcoin, how they're unfolding. And you kind of described it as another layer to explore. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so I think that we have, the base layer has some privacy features that get added in each release or incrementally at wallet level. So the Taproot and Schnorr proposal has some kind of anti-fingerprinting benefits, which can make, a Lightning transaction look the same as a multi-sig or a single sig. So that's nice. But it is difficult to have kind of sender-recipient anonymity at the base level. One incremental thing people do is the different CoinJoin wallets, and there are three main ones there: Samurai, Wasabi, and Join Market. Another direction more recently is PayJoin. So Blockstream sort of organized a workshop to try and find some incremental privacy improvements, and that's starting to be adopted and integrated into wallets. So Blue Wallet recently made an announcement supporting PayJoin. The BTC Pay Server kind of be your own merchant. It has an integrated wallet that also has PayJoin support. So PayJoin helps, but fundamentally to do something radically better, I think you need a different layer. So confidential transactions, which we have in Liquid Layer 2, is an interesting step towards privacy because it hides it doesn't hide, which coin is spent to which address, but it hides how many coins are in there, and that makes it much harder to distinguish payment from change, or if coins are joined, you can join anything if you have confidential transactions. Basically, you don't have to match amounts or anything like that. So that's another step forward. So midterm, maybe Bitcoin itself would see confidential transactions after some more optimization improvements are done. But there are potential to see more advanced privacy technologies come into Bitcoin, so more zero knowledge proof kinds of things as an area of active research to, because Bitcoin has a very high security, safety first approach. So I think, one way to do that is to deploy technology first in a layer 2, which is a more permissionless opt into the potential technology risk. And as that matures, to bring that into Bitcoin. Another general sort of extensibility mechanism for Bitcoin is simplicity, which is next generation smart contracting system designed originally for Bitcoin. So we've been working on that for about 3.5 years now at Blockstream, and we'll be integrating that into Liquid early next year. There is a developer release for Bitcoin, like a test network with simplicity integrated for Bitcoin and for Liquid. So I would say that's some years out for Bitcoin, but people will be able to use it and learn about it and practice with it in Liquid. And the interesting thing about that is it makes Bitcoin extensible. So if you had simplicity in Bitcoin today, something like Schnorr signatures wouldn't need a soft fork. You could just implement them.
Oh, that's really interesting. Well, I think we have to wrap it up here. And, for the Orange Pill audience, we're all hodlers in the audience. And we, however, talk about this Renaissance 2.0, that there's we're on our own. We're sovereign individuals now. What sort of thing would you recommend just outside of Bitcoin, for the audience in terms of how to be a better Bitcoiner, whether it's art or music or learning to code or a book that they should read to really understand the ideology and the thinking and the mind-blowingness behind Bitcoin? Is there any sort of recommendation kind of at the edge of Bitcoin?
Well, I do like the kind of, longer term thinking about investment and about saving that Bitcoin seems to naturally bring to people. I mean, if you have an asset and it gains ground very quickly, you become reluctant to spend coins and money in general. In terms of sort of, reduced government futures, I mean, it's a work of fiction, but I find Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson highly amusing. It's been a few years since I read it, but it's still my kind of favorite kind of cyberpunk future book.
Oh, well, I've never read that. So
Right, I read it. It came out in the 90s, yeah?
Yeah.
Right, long ago. It's still a classic, an instant classic, Snow Crash. All right, let's get on it.
All right. Thanks so much, Adam.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. It's always good to speak to the source, somebody from the source of the early days of Bitcoin to understand all the stuff that's going on today. Well, yesterday, today, and tomorrow, because all that satellite stuff they do, that's like the future, man.
Oh, definitely. I mean, this makes the anti-fragility of Bitcoin even more, because people always say, what if the internet goes down? Right? Doesn't make any difference, because it's all on the satellites now. So people say, well, how safe is Bitcoin? Is it really unconfiscatable? Of course. It's the only wealth you could possibly have that is unconfiscatable. If you think about it, if you've got a memory wallet tied to your wealth on the Bitcoin, it's the only wealth that's not confiscatable. Your gold can be confiscated, fiat can be confiscated, property can be confiscated, but the only non-confiscatable wealth would be on the Bitcoin blockchain, and then you rehook up to the satellites and you're in business. So it's just, people are still starting to wrap their minds around this, but the learning curve is kicking in and the FOMO is kicking in. And now big corporations are buying hundreds of millions and billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin. And so it just, the train is leaving the station.
Yeah, there are some people who are dumb, but the people who watch Orange Pill are enlightened, right? We're entering Renaissance 2.0. We are understanding the ability of man and humans, like as a community, and what we can do. And we can put satellites into outer space. We don't need our government to do it. You know, freaking Adam Back can do it. We don't need their money. We have our own money. We can create our own money. And we think, therefore we are. Because you know what? I was trying to segue to a video that I've been wanting to show for the last 9 episodes of Orange Pill. And I've never found a way to put it in. But, you know, this is a kitten video. And it's so cute that I had to do it because it reminds me of Descartes, this moment of I think, therefore I am. And, you know, it sounds so obvious in a simple sentence, right? I think, therefore I am. And yet that caused like riots, that caused like the Inquisition to come for him, that caused like such profound chaos. But it was it marked the end of one era and the beginning of a new for man.
Yeah, it was the beginning of self-sovereignty.
Yes. And we couldn't be here without basically this kitten giving you an example of why we're here. Right. So, you know, a simple thing of like, wait, I'm moving that foot. These are my paws.
In Descartes' era, before his statement, his maxim of I think, therefore I am, of course, thinking was done for you by the highly centralized Catholic Church, right? The Vatican. So they did all your thinking for you, and you were asked not to think. And thinking is the devil's tool. So
yes.
Descartes was saying, you know what? That's stupid. I think, therefore I am. You know, I can think for myself. And that was part of the Enlightenment, wasn't it?
Well, you are, because God made you there. He put you there. You have no choice in it. None of your thoughts are original. You hear because your ears had hearing qualities that God decided to put in them. And he like was doing all these autopsies on cadavers and realized like he saw the eardrums, and he saw all the, like, he figured like, oh, it's going into the brain, and that he pieced all this together. But, you know, I think, therefore I am. And what he came up with, like calculus, he invented like calculus. And that happened after like he had some sort of night terrors. Like he woke up from a mad dream and got trapped and like frozen, and something weird happened when he was in the military. And like he invented calculus and that from there. So just if you ever feel bad, like had too much tequila, you know, everybody does it every once in a while. You go to Mexico, you swallow that worm and like you go crazy and have hallucinations. Most people just wake up with a headache, but you never know. One day you might wake up and invent the next level of calculus or something.
Yeah, that could happen. It happened to Descartes, and it could happen to anybody. So, you know, the thing about it is that people really prefer dead certainty. They prefer certainty. This idea of we are individually sovereign and we're actually, the connection to the church is fabricated, is scary for most people, you know, because you're on your own, you know, you are floating in some place in the multiverse, and that's not a comfortable feeling. You know, the people would prefer to feel like I don't want to think. I don't need to think. I let this outside entity do all my thinking for me. And, you know, this struggle, we see it all the time today. You know, there's a tension in society. People are kind of drift toward having a highly centralized government that will think for them. And that's very comforting for a lot of people. But it's also, no government has ever been proven to be trustworthy in this role, or religion for that matter. So we always come back to being individually sovereign. We have to face that we are all individually sovereign. And so now what? What do we do from that moment? It's like what comes after the red pill, and that's the orange pill. The red pill is, hey, I'm individually sovereign, and no church and no system of government is actually scalable or makes any sense in terms of my cosmic being. So then I have to go to the orange pill, and the orange pill is a kind of an enlightened individual sovereignty, where you are individually sovereign and driven by absolute scarcity And on the monetary front, that would be Bitcoin. But on the spiritual front, that would be love, right? So love is the equivalent to Bitcoin in that it exists in absolute scarcity. And so this is when you pair the two, absolutely scarce Bitcoin with love, you end up with the orange pill.
Wow, that was so profound.
Deep.
And
It's very deep.
it made me think of a conversation I had with Madge Weinstein, and I also do one right now coming up with Madge Weinstein called Girl Talk, and next week Max and Madge are going to have boy talk conversation. But she was talking about this. I can't even say the name, but it was an Egyptian pharaoh who was married to Nefertiti and whose son was King Tut. So, I mean, obviously very famous, but he was erased from Egyptian history because he worshipped one god. And he was the very first monotheistic person, right? So until that time, and this caused a sea change in that never was the Egyptians were never able to go back. So when he became pharaoh, he worshipped one pharaoh, Atakanen, I think something like that. And until that time, the people of Egypt looked to their pharaohs as the intermediary between the many gods and them. So that's why they, were obedient to the pharaoh, because the pharaoh was the representative. You spoke through they were the operating system. They were the system of communicating and with the gods. So when this pharaoh decided, no, there's only one God, the people started to think like they still worshipped their own individual, these multi-gods, these many gods. And they no longer had to go to the pharaoh for that, to communicate with God.
Right, there was that split. With up until then, it was polytheism. Then this was the introduction of this idea of monotheism, and it caused huge split in society. But that idea of monotheism, of course, would play a factor later in the Judeo-Christian, Islamic traditions, and but this was the beginning of it.
Well, the Jews first came like through Egypt, right? You know, so that's where they would have been exposed to that. But that guy, that pharaoh, was erased from history for like 3,000 years.
But you can't kill an idea.
Yeah, and the only reason why he was found was the only reason why they discovered him in like the late 1800s, maybe early 1900s, is because the predecessor from 5,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, with the Hittites and contracts stamped in stone, and they saw in these Hittite contracts, and there was another group between the Egyptians and the Hittites. The Hittites are in modern Turkey, and they also had stone contracts. And this pharaoh that existed, his sister was married off to this other leader, a pharaoh of another area, this other empire. And the father of them, who had since passed away, had promised a gold vase, a vase made of gold, a vase made of gold. And he wrote in this contract on stone to complain that instead he had delivered him a gold, like plated vase, and it wasn't real gold. And how could you do this?
It wasn't verified. Unverified gold.
Yeah. So the historians, when they finally found this and translated it, they could see that they were referring to the father, and they know the father was a pharaoh. So, and that he was obviously in a position of power. And they mentioned that we're working with you to stop this war with the Hittites. And
right. Well, this is perfect because unverified gold was part and parcel of a monotheistic, polytheistic split in human culture and society and history, and which has been with us now for thousands of years. But going back to this original split, it gives us insight into why Bitcoin is now the only absolutely scarce form of money that can be used as a medium of exchange and a store of value that would have cleared up this misunderstanding thousands of years ago.
Yes.
And cleared up every misunderstanding for the past 3,000 years. And so we have to ask ourselves, the idea of monotheistic purity test that would exist outside of this idea of individual sovereignty versus the idea of the purity test of self-verifiable, absolutely scarce Bitcoin that exists mathematically, universally, omnipotently, omnipresently, is the end game of a 3,000-year-old debate. So I would say that this is why Bitcoin is the successor to all monotheistic and polytheistic conversations, discussions, and societal formations going back 3,000 years. There's always been this need for a verifiable way to transmit pure gold, obviously.
And it comes down to matters of war and peace.
Right. War, peace, gold, treasure.
Trust.
It wasn't verified. They thought they were getting pure gold. They got not what they thought that they got. That problem was solved in 2008 and 2009 with Bitcoin. That took 3,000 years to solve this problem for humanity. It goes back to pre-Judeo-Christian culture. It goes back to the earliest forms of civilization post of the movement of humans out of Africa, right? Then they were in the Middle East and et cetera. So this was really one of the oldest questions of organizing humanity ever has been solved in 2009.
And we were so like near perfection then, like we could see so much more and build things like the pyramids that they still don't know how they built them and stuff like that.
Mathematics were key in building these things like pyramids and other structures, but they couldn't apply it to money because it wasn't, we didn't live in a digital multiverse of frictionless, no cost digits where essentially the cost of bandwidth, processing power, and the storage for a digital entity is always approaching zero, whether you use Moore's law or what have you. But the cost is always hitting toward that big fat zero. And Breedlove has a fantastic essay on the history of zero and how that relates to Bitcoin. This is another aspect to it.
We're going to talk to him actually, I think next week, maybe the week after. But, segueing from that and all these pharaohs leading to eventually monotheistic religions and the kingdoms in the neo-feudal times of the feudal and then now the neo-feudal times across the world, we still have a queen in the United Kingdom. And this is a good segue from that to our interview with Madge, who some might say looks like a drag queen. But Queen expresses support for mainstream media. And this goes with what I was saying about the shmuta, the collapse of institutions, the collapse of faith in these institutions. We saw it thousands of years ago during this era of this pharaoh who got erased from history because the following pharaohs.
Deplatformed.
Yeah, well, he got deplatformed because the pharaohs that followed him, including Nefertiti and King Tut, they realized King Tut was actually the one, his son, who then eradicated all any sort of signs of his father because he didn't want the people to worship just one God.
They went back to polytheism.
Yes,
so the idea sprung up, faded.
And it was quashed. It was like, whatever it was, they quashed it. So here we're going to talk about mainstream media and alternative media in this girl talk segment between Stacy and Madge Weinstein. Next week, we're going to boy talk between Max and Madge Weinstein.
Looking forward to that. Really. Nice.
All right. Welcome to Orange Pills Girl Talk with Stacy and Madge.
Hey, hi, Stacy. Nice to see you in real time.
Hey, girl, you're looking so young. What's going on?
Well, actually, I had a little bit of work done. It's called the Zoom Improve My Appearance slider, and I have it all the way up, and I love it, and I want to turn it on my whole life.
Really? I wish we could all, maybe, you know what? Actually, I think one day we will all walk around as kind of avatars. What do you think of that possibility? Because we talked to this guy, OP09, who kind of sees that as the future of the world, is that we will be avatars and can put on new skins or take off our skin and change our whole entire culture and attitude and look and style.
Well, then I could become a man if I wanted to become a man. I would just be a man. I would be a 55-year-old man. I would be balding, and I would be impotent, and therefore I would rule the world.
Wow.
Yeah,
I've never seen anybody want to be that.
Well, I want power. I want money, and in my age, you start thinking about retirement. And I feel like if I were a man And if I were a ruling class man, I would have a lot of money. And I think that would make me feel comfortable right now. I mean, the bad thing is you have to shit all over everyone, but, it seems to work for a lot of people in power. They don't seem to feel a lot of guilt about it, Just hope I don't get the COVID.
So for a woman, there aren't very many women out there who would poop on radio, but you do that for your podcast. You often poop.
Oh, sure. I do. And I feel like that's just who I am. In fact, I just sharted right before this episode because that's just part of being a human being. I don't know what the big deal is about shitting on the podcast. I was waiting so long for Jack Dorsey to give me voice tweets. He finally did. The first thing I did was just shit.
Yeah. I listened to it. I thought that Madge can't possibly be actually doing this. You titled it that, so you did warn people, but I listened and you were pooping.
And how did that make you feel?
Well, it made me feel like I was at the airport.
Yeah.
People get loose bowels at the airport. A lot of people are afraid to fly.
And then, of course, that brings up the whole idea of the duty plume. And I know the CDC just acknowledged that there is this aerosol, coronavirus. But we've been talking about this for months, since
you and
I think January, about the duty plume, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I remember reading about in Wuhan when all those Twitter, videos were going around before America knew about it, because apparently we're not allowed to know about it until the president acknowledges it, even though it was all over Twitter.
Yeah.
But I remember seeing there was an apartment building in Wuhan where everybody got the virus, and the only possible way was through the sewage, through the odor of the sewage. That's all. So this entire building got COVID from this duty plume. And so it's obvious. It's been known. There was no other way they could have all gotten it. They were all locked in their own apartments. But, I think that what I'm doing is spreading awareness about the plume by posting my voice tweets of duty. And in fact, thank you for retroactively helping me explain that.
It's public service, right? So Twitter can't cancel you or deplatform you for this.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it's a public service. And, you mentioned explosive diarrhea in the airport. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I noticed a few things. So I've always thought that ED stands for explosive diarrhea and erectile dysfunction. And I always get those two confused. This week I learned that it also stands for eating disorder. And you're not supposed to talk about eating disorders because it triggers the obese.
What do you think of this whole state of things? I went away in 1994. I left America, and then I come back in 2016, and people seem insane. It's gone totally insane. And I guess in one way, I totally believe in total free speech. But on the other hand, if people put themselves in an MSNBC and a Fox News bubble, they become insane. They are insane.
I totally agree. I don't watch either. I don't watch Fox, and I don't watch MSNBC, and I don't miss either one. And I know so many people that watch Rachel Maddow, because I'm a lefty. There's no secret about that. I'm very progressive. But I found after Trump got elected, I sort of lost communication. Basically, I lost my fan base, and I basically dumped them. I had a secret Facebook group for all my fans, and I just dumped them because I was so tired of hearing the party line about the Russiagate, and everybody was just parroting Rachel Maddow, and I just don't buy it. I never bought the propaganda, and so it's very difficult for me. I try to find my own news, and it's hard. Actually, I get most of my news from you, Stacy, on your Twitter feed.
Oh,
it's hard. I really do. I don't know anybody else who sort of manages the stream of news better than you do.
I see all these people and they've lost their minds. So it seems what they have in common on that side, they believe in the Russiagate conspiracy theory. They watch MSNBC. These people believe in the QAnon conspiracy theory. They watch Fox. Okay, I'm not going to watch either of those because I'm going to protect myself.
Yeah, I try to figure out what's going on, and it's very depressing because, I've always read that Orwell quote that the idea of totalitarianism is not to make you believe in one side or the other. It's to make you believe that there is no truth. And I feel like that's where we're at. I've been driven to a state where I'm not supposed to know what the truth is. And people can basically believe whatever conspiracy they want because all they have to do is say, well, there's no objective truth. Everybody's confusing and I don't know anything.
So, because I feel like you and I talk all the time on Telegram, and I feel like we're similar age. We came up through the same sort of time. And I remember some of the 70s, not as well. I was a little kid, and 80s, but looking back even on documentaries and seeing like that whole period when we were born and growing up is like, we used to have COINTELPRO back then. Like when the boomers were coming of age back then, and they had the anti-war movement and the hippie and protest movements and stuff, the FBI agents had to do elaborate schemes to try to infiltrate. Now they just like ask to appear on MSNBC, and it's like, okay. It's like, it's weird how that happens and it's not discussed.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. I just find myself so despondent because everything is so horrible. And I just, like I have my own opinion about things, and I just feel like there's nobody on my side. I used to have a side. When Bush was president, I had a side. I was on the side against Bush. When Obama was president, I was pretty much on Obama's side. I've learned a lot of things since then, but about how he was a neoliberal. But I felt, in fact, I wasn't really political in that whole Obama time because I felt like, well, things are okay. I personally have health care. But now it's like Trump is president, and now I find myself not agreeing with either side, and I feel like you're really the only person I agree with. So I just have no side, and it's a very lonely feeling. It really is.
Well, I find it remarkable that Trump just delivers up softball after softball for them to hit. And they just keep going back to Russiagate instead. And, most people outside of Twitter don't care about that. So why they aren't talking about any of these huge economic issues is beyond me. I genuinely don't understand it. And I don't get it. Like, do you have any idea at all, like, why the Democrats won't run with a single thing? Like, Bernie seems to get it, but they hate him.
I think it's all about hating Trump. So everybody's focused on getting Trump out, and there's nothing, and nobody can see past that. Yeah. There was a really interesting, though, and I'm certainly of that camp where I can't stand Trump. I think the way he's handled coronavirus is so awful. I hate the lies, et cetera, et cetera. But I read something from Ashtan Ratanzi.
Yeah, Ashtan Ratanzi, yeah.
I can't, that. I follow him, and he said, isn't it interesting that we've had 4 years of no new wars?
Yes.
And I didn't think about that, but you have to look at, as painful as it is, you have to look at both sides, and that's the whole other side of this, this Democrats versus Republican thing, is that really neoconservatives, neoliberals, they all just want war all the time. There's hardly any difference when it comes to foreign policy, like when it comes to Israel, the Middle East. And really, in some ways, Trump has been very different from both of those camps.
True.
I don't know. But unfortunately, he's also an idiot and has no ability to make decisions. So I'm just so confused.
Well, I mean, I could see where he acts like a buffoon and talks like a buffoon, but I associate that with the 1970s New York. Those are my memories. Like, everybody talked like that. They were thugs and they talked like thugs. And what the fuck you talking about? Like, that seems like what I grew up with. Yeah. But on the other hand, I feel like, I don't like empire. I think like it's I think it's actually bad for the domestic population. It's great for the elite. It always has been great for the elite. But look at Europe. Every European I know, and we lived there for a long time and travel, they live a way higher, they have a much higher standard of living than the ordinary American. And most Americans don't understand that, but way higher. But, you look at just recent history, the ordinary person in Europe had a horrible life. A lot of poverty, all sorts of disease. And then as soon as their empires end and the government needs the consent of the people again, then I think, then they care about jobs. Then they care about the 70,000 people overdosing on opioids every year. But right now they don't need to because, we get free goods from China and we don't have to worry about that.
So do you think we're really going to crash? Because I know you Max have been predicting it for a long time that the empire will crash, but is it going to happen? Are we going to know that it's happening, or do you think we're in the middle of it?
I think it happens slowly and then suddenly, just like the British Empire took, 60 years to disappear. The Roman Empire took hundreds, like 250 years to collapse. So I think Trump has definitely accelerated it because he uses the tools we have like a thug, right? Obama started it like with the first cut off of SWIFT, when he cut Iran off from SWIFT. And that was like the beginning of the end, because as soon as you did that, then the process is set in motion that even Germany is working on an alternative to SWIFT. So if you can't, that's how we extend our power around the world, is through the US dollar. And if we don't have that, then we lose. Then we lose it. Then China stops sending us their free goods, essentially, because we just send them paper money that we just print up out of thin air. So it's not backed by anything but the Pentagon, really.
I just don't know what I'm supposed to do with myself to feel sane. You know, I don't want to take drugs. I don't want to take Xanax. I don't know how to process all of this, you know?
You know what I was going to say about propaganda when you mentioned that is one thing that is pretty interesting to me watching the elite meltdown. And I do believe it is an elite meltdown, that I called it that. And then Matt Taibbi came up with a better phrase, and that was the elite messaging system has failed. And they're very pissed off with people about this. This is that anger toward the deplorable population and calling half of America fascist. And I think it's because they're angry that they can't communicate and that you don't understand how fabulous they are, and why you must be an imbecile and an idiot if you don't understand what they understand and believe it. So one thing I think that really stands out to me with this whole Russiagate thing is when all the evidence they presented from 2016, 2017 period was that the Russians were targeting Black people and gays, right? With the Buff Bernie meme and the Black Lives Matter, agitating some unrest there. And I was like, well, if you think about it, those are two of the groups you pander to, right? To maintain your power. And it gives you the identity politics and look how fabulous and progressive we are. And especially with the African-American population, they only ever pay attention every 4 years because they do not want to go there to the systemic economic issue involving Black America. So I think they project, and it's pretty good, their state of insanity, how much they project. Like, they tell you everything you need to know about what's actually going on.
In other words, they were accusing Russia of the things that they're doing.
Yes.
That's what you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, you know what really bothered me too, when the Trump tax returns came out, I was reading the New York Times, and the New York Times said very specifically there was no evidence of any connection to Russia. And somebody responded to me, why would a tax return show Russian finances? And I said, well, you have to read it again, because he was so already in his mind believing that there has to be, that he wasn't even reading the sentence properly. And I said, read it again. It doesn't say there was any Russian money coming in on the tax return. It says there was no indication of Russian connections. And I just think people need to acknowledge that and be honest about it, because that doesn't mean you can't still hate Trump. There's a million things you can still hate Trump for, like what he does.
Yes.
You just don't get that little piece, because it's fake and it's false. And you're not going to beat him with false information. That's what he does. You have to use truth. And there's plenty of truth to go against him, to beat him with.
I
don't understand it.
I think it's an economic issue. And I think, MSNBC was practically bankrupt, right? Before
Trump.
Before Trump. Especially under Obama, because they loved Obama. People don't tune into that. They tune into hate and conflict, and they want to be outraged, and they want to be righteous and superior. Well,
I think that's true. And I think, like, as far as solution, I try to be solutions oriented, even though I'm really not. But I think, like, when you look at your Telegram group for the Orange Pill, I think in some ways that's where things need to go, because, like, I know most of your audience is probably on the libertarian side of things, more conservative. Yet I have no issue. I have no problem communicating with those people, because they're willing to hear other people's thoughts and be open-minded. Yes. And they're not listening to mainstream media. They're listening to you guys and probably other, unique sources. I think people need to stop being on the black and white side and be able to communicate. And if you're a Republican or whatever, you have to have friends on the other side. You have to. And you have to genuinely be able to like people who don't agree with you politically, because that's civil.
Yes.
It has to be that way. If you're just somebody, and I think this is what, like, the MSNBC types and the Fox News types encourage, is just like, no, it's our side or your side. I can't tell you how many times I see on Facebook, if you hate Trump, then just defriend me now.
Yeah.
Well, what is that going to do? So you're just going to talk to yourself more.
Yes.
It's just, come on.
I saw that. Facebook is the worst for that. I don't know what it is, but I saw that just this morning. I was looking at Facebook, and I saw on my sister's page, our cousin commented because she had posted something pro-Biden or anti-Trump, and he's pro-Trump. So, but he has the same last name as us, and he mentioned, Trump 2020, and a friend of my sister's who I know, she went berserk, and she's like, "You scumbag, you're probably not even American. You're probably a bot. You're a Russian bot.
Yeah.
Get off this page." I'm like, that's our cousin. He has they got into a fight about whether or not
Your cousin's a bot.
Yeah. And it's just like, what the fuck?
That's
like,
hilarious.
People have lost their mind. My cousin's a bot, and well, like I said at the top of the show, if we all become avatars one day, we might have bot cousins. We might not ever see them in real life.
Yeah, go look your cousin up on ancestry.com. It might just be a bot. Maybe all those people are fake. Who knows?
Anyway, Madge, this was a good 31 minutes.
Yes.
And if you have complaints about how long we're talking about girl talk, then
fast forward. Yeah, get fucked.
Yeah. Right. So I hope you enjoyed that. That was a different, tryout of formats. And, when we talk of Rachel Maddow, one thing I realized is that she's kind of like the Marty Feldman of cable news presenters, right? Like
The bug eyes?
Yeah, the bug eyes. She at least he was funny. Like I guess she's kind of funny if you don't take it seriously, but he was intentionally funny. She's unintentionally funny. Like, so, she's a performance artist. She is like a Rhodes Scholar, and she is like this intellectual. And I think she's kind of embarrassed that she does this for money, but that she's pushing all these conspiracy theories, and she compensates for it by the bug eyes. Like, look, this is Putin.
Yeah. Like Young Frankenstein with Marty Feldman is in that film.
Yes, the famous photo.
He plays Igor. Yeah, very funny. Well, yeah, Rachel is a performance artist for sure. And as I explained a few times, she's essentially a tax write-off for Comcast. So Comcast.
Yeah, go into that a little bit further, why she's a tax write-off for Comcast.
Well, they have big salaries, right? So they have to be able to write those salaries off against something. And Comcast is a huge media conglomerate. And on their movie production side and other production side, they have, it's a very hit or miss business, the entertainment business. You get 1 or 2 hits for every 10 flops. So you've got this huge number of losses that you're carrying forward. And you need to be able to write that off against other parts of the balance sheet. If they have an occasional Star Wars sequel, Part 7, and it does, oh my God, we did $4 billion. Now you've got this huge gain on the income statement. So to lower the tax liability in that year, you look on your portfolio of assets across the Comcast corporate megalith. You're like, okay, we're going to take, Rachel Maddow's $30 million or $40 million a year salary, and we use that. We're gonna put that underneath the production budget for Star Wars or whatever.
She's
film.
a tax loss, but
So
also
it's a tax
describe
loss.
when you were in Wall Street how the actual cable industry was a tax write-off.
Right. So people on cable industry would attack Donald Trump because he was, as a real estate developer, he had a lot of losses to offset his gains, and he ended up paying $750 in taxes. This is pretty much every real estate developer story that you will ever meet has the exact same story. And so, but these cable news outlets are screaming about this and pounding this number home, and like really, and really getting into people's face. And then it reminded me back in the 1980s that the entire cable industry was built by tax shelters or tax write-offs.
And you sold some of them, right? To
I was
clients.
working on Wall Street at the time. And so, typical cable, I think Time Warner was a big sponsor of many tax shelters on Wall Street. So client would put in $50,000 or $100,000 and they get to write off $200,000 or $250,000 or more on their taxes. I mean, that was the tax shelter business was huge up until 1986 when Reagan had a sweeping legislation that got rid of most of them. But the entire cable industry was built on tax shelters and tax write-offs. So that's how Rachel Maddow owes her entire existence to the tax shelter business.
Wow. Well, so we gave you this important information from Madge about erasing and spreading awareness of the plume, and she's done that for you. So, this is what you get from alternative media. Outside with the Queen. The Queen, of course, is saying the Queen of England supports Rachel Maddow and believes you should watch her instead. And I want to say, what I was actually starting to say about the Queen is like, this is what I go back to the whole schmuta, is like the collapse in faith in institutions. And when the people lose faith in the institutions, that's what happens first. And then they actually collapse, whether violently as the Tsar of Russia or the royal family of France ended violently. They lost their lives. Or like peacefully, but still chaotically, like when the Soviet Union collapsed, the people they couldn't maintain faith anymore in this this economic paradigm that they had, and this command and control political system they had set
Right.
up.
If there's a problem with the folks not believing the institutions like the mainstream media,
Yes.
the answer is to increase competition.
Yes,
Right?
not
That's-
stop it.
That's the answer to it. Not as the Queen is suggesting that, well, I'm going to keep supporting the status quo. Gee, big shock there. And give my blessing to the BBC and other mainstream outlets in the UK, and who are doing a good job fending off any competition. Therefore, I can say unequivocally that what you're hearing is fake news.
Exactly. Like, it's kind of the equivalent in Thailand is very big on this, is like they only bring out the semi-divine king every once in a while when the two sides, the red and the yellow, can't get on and they're fighting, and then the king shows up and they're like, oh my God, I can't believe we need to appease the king. And, that's the same thing that I hope I don't get like sent away for 25 years in Thailand for saying that. I like Thailand. Don't sentence me to 25 years.
They have a very fine king over there.
Yeah.
He does a great
benevolent.
job. He's very benevolent, and he's doing an excellent job. Let's be clear about that. That's what, without doubt, that's how we feel.
And again, I do want to say, just because we're talking about the Queen, we're not saying that necessarily that Madge Weinstein looks like a drag queen. So again, I mentioned that I showed you the cute kitty photo, and I do want to say, there are Stacey Herbert imposters on Twitter sending people DMs offering motherly advice. So if you
Me. I'm hacking into your account. I'm asking you motherly advice for my kitty cats.
No, this is people scamming. And what I want to say is, if I ever DM you with motherly advice, I don't have motherly advice for you. So please, I know people call like the chancellor of Germany mom, and they see the Queen is kind of a mother.
Bitcoin mom. There is an actual Bitcoin mom.
There is
in
Bitcoin
Chicago.
mom. Yeah,
Talk to her.
she lives in Denver.
In Denver, yeah. Talk to Bitcoin mom.
Right. And then I want to we always end on good news and positive stories, because I'm so motherly.
Yeah, I'm feeling the embrace of that motherly love as you intro the story.
I do feel like a mom in our Telegram group, because I'm always like, every time I wake up, I go in there and it's like a whole bunch of boys like fighting and mom, ban this guy. Oh, mom, just shut this guy up. And
yeah, it's amazing. It's just there's just always degrades into this mudslinging match wherever you go.
And then it's quickly brought back into order, and we remember what we're all here for. But here's Abe Cambridge, and he's talking about the legend that is Nikola Tesla. I love the story of Nikola Tesla, and Max and I often stay in the whole Bryant Park area of Manhattan, where he did a lot of his work. And in fact, Bryant Park is subtitled Nikola Tesla Park. And so, the guy is a genius, as we know. And speaking of this whole, the shifts in consciousness that see an end of faith in one sort of organizing system, and the rising of a new way of looking at things. And sometimes it succeeds and sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes it's squashed for a few decades or hundreds of years. And Nikola Tesla, of course, had a lot of competition with, was it Edison?
Yeah, Edison. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and some of Edison's ideas went out, and Nikola Tesla his ideas got squashed. But here's a little video about Nikola Tesla.
There is no spoon. Ignoring the fact that we lost around 1,000 years of scientific progress during the Dark Ages, even during the 20th century, we were set back about 100 years in technological advancement. In 1901, Nikola Tesla started to construct the Wardenclyffe Tower. Now, this was the first base station of what was going to be called the World Power Network. In the beginning of the 20th century, Nikola Tesla was starting to build a global, not just transmission network for data and broadcasting, but a global energy network that was wireless, transmitting energy both through the ground and through the ionosphere. Now, unfortunately for Nikola Tesla, one of his investors, JB Morgan, allegedly cut the funding from that program and burnt the tower to the ground because, legend has it, they were invested into wired telecommunications and wired energy network. This world power system would have been an open source energy network that anybody can participate in. You might think of it like Tesla was trying to set up the Bitcoin of the energy system back in the 20th century, where anybody can participate in this global energy network. Now, we can only imagine what the world would look like today had he achieved such. But here we are in the 21st century, and we do actually now have our own form of open source energy, and that is solar energy. Because with a solar panel, you can position it and harvest that open source energy from the sky, which anybody can elect to use, and you do not need permission from a centralized energy network in order to harness that. So at least Tesla's dream of open source energy access is at last coming about.
Well, didn't I tell you that JP Morgan is the cat in the Matrix?
Right, there they are again, messing around, messing about, and they're the opposite of open source, the opposite of global energy, opposite of Bitcoin, and they've been they've been the Moriarty, the nemesis, the devil in the mix, in the matrix for hundreds of years. And this is just another chapter in it. And fortunately, entrepreneurs like our friend down there at the Sun Exchange, Abraham Cambridge, who is in the tradition of Nikola Tesla and other great entrepreneurs of history, who is not giving up the fight. That is, he's still, he's got, I remember reading Buckminster Fuller, he wrote books, and he wrote one major book, which was kind of an autobiographical book. And when Buckminster Fuller was a young man and a young scientist, he made a commitment one day to only do things in the interest of everybody on planet Earth. He would not do anything in his own self-interest. He would only think in terms of how does this help everybody, which led to discoveries like the geodesic dome and how to create cheap housing, the electric car, and things like that. So by thinking globally, he had a great career and he was successful. But the idea was, if I just think globally, I'm gonna be on a different plane of existence. And Abraham Cambridge is similar to this type of thinking, right? I mean, he's just totally into how do we create this global energy grid? How do we harness solar energy? How do we implement Bitcoin? And the end result is not self-interest as much as global interest. And that global interest is really gives, I think, everyone, as you say, is such a positive note.
It's self-sovereignty. And as you see, I mean, and I didn't actually remember that he mentioned JP Morgan when I mentioned the Matrix and then when we mentioned the pharaohs. And what is always the common thing is there's a certain group of elite throughout history that they benefit most when you are dependent on them, when you are not self-sovereign, when you need them to be the intermediary between you and your own emotions, your fear, your lust, your love, your fear.
This is the
greed.
problem with all this, money printing and government programs, is that you lose self-sovereignty, you become dependent on the government. Mm-hmm. And so that's the recipe for social disaster. And the reason why Bitcoin is considered a savings technology is that self-sovereignty comes from savings. Everyone needs to be independently wealthy. And that can be as much as having even $1 in Bitcoin is your first step toward being independently wealthy. It sounds hard to believe. How do I become independently wealthy for $1? Well, with Bitcoin, it's unconfiscatable. There's no centralized authority. And there is the ability to carry it into the future indefinitely. So that's a step on the path. And then it changes your consciousness. And then the next thing you know, you'll be so wealthy, essentially, that you stop thinking about being wealthy. It's like you're past it already. There's other stuff to think about.
Well, that's kind of what you're describing as what I say, a sat of one's own. So, the Virginia Woolf wrote the essay, A Room of One's Own, and she was asked to speak at Oxford or Cambridge. And that's when she wrote this essay. That's when she wrote this essay, which was that, she was asked about how to get more women novelists, like writers. And she said, her argument was essentially that women need a room of their own in order to think and to be independent and economically independent, self-sovereign. And that would create the arena in which they can imagine and innovate and think of these sort of things. And that's what I'm saying is like your mindset does change. Even $10 worth of Bitcoin, $10 worth of Bitcoin puts you in the room of Orange Pill Podcast Telegram group.
It puts you in the room with Michael Saylor. It puts you in the room with Jack Dorsey.
Yes.
And it puts you in the room with Satoshi Nakamoto.
Yes.
It puts you in the room with the Orange Pill.
Yes.
As far as women are the equivocation between a room of one's own and Bitcoin a sat of one's own, that's perfectly fine in terms of any women in the audience who want individual sovereignty, who want to have self sovereignty, if you will. I mean, Bitcoin is the first time in history that it's so accessible because let's face it, history has been harsh to women. Because the forces of civilization, typically up until Bitcoin, had a bias toward brute strength, moving rocks, killing people. This favored the brute strength of men. So now with Bitcoin, actually, it's a level playing field. So this is a great moment.
And this is a great moment to end. And remember, it's the orange it's the sunexchange.com/orange pill. Then there's also the Telegram group t.me/orange pill. And then there's /orange pill Espanol for Spanish speakers. And I know Spanish speakers are able to watch this thanks to YouTube. YouTube does do automatic translations, which is amazing. And finally, if you want to, be part of this Bitcoin community of the individuals of Orange Pill, we do support Bitcoin Lady in Botswana. She works tirelessly. She has an amazing life story of overcoming great hardship. She found Bitcoin through love. Actually, she found it trying to help her son who did pass away. But she found it and then somebody stole it from her in those early days of Bitcoin, which was, very easy to have your Bitcoin stolen. But, she's been working nevertheless nonstop, tirelessly to spread Bitcoin in Botswana, the home of the honey badger. She educates all sorts of young people on Bitcoin. We have 7 of these, these were made 15 years ago, right? There are no more of these. And I only found them because they were in storage, and these are the last 7. And we're going to auction off 5 of them. Max and I get 1 each, and we're going to still contribute to Alakanani at the.
These are museum quality stickers.
Yes. So give $5, $10 if you can only afford $1. Donate $1 worth of Satoshis and enter your name into the lottery. I guess I guess we'll pick somebody at random from our group. So
I'm anxiously waiting for this. This is going to be exciting.
Yeah, it'll be very useful and helpful, and keep our whole community going and get some flow. You want harmony and flow.
I want my chi opened up.
You want some flow of Satoshis.
I need a flow good chi
to the home of the honey badger. You want the honey badger gods
channel.
Remember, we have multiverses of multi-gods.
Through me.
You want the honey badger gods
Satoshi
to bless
badger.
The orange pill community.
In one holistic Uma. Orange Pill Podcast.